in the region, the reconciliation process ends within, from what I see, Croatia primarily, but I would say also other countries, because I have some insight into that. It's an off and on process. It's famous 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, if we're lucky, because it can also be the other way around. But it's an off and on process. It very much depends on even individual leaders in respective countries, how important people see this as an issue, how dangerous sometimes people see leaving it to its own devices and not really working on changing this political culture and working on reconciliation as a way of life. I would say that at the beginning, especially in the late 90s until about 2015, maybe 2017, European Union played a very important role. It played a very important role without even wanting it, so to say, without even focusing on the Western Balkans or focusing on this region, because there was a universal support of the general population in all these countries for the country's membership in the European Union. People wanted to be Europe, so to speak, or specifically to be European Union for many reasons, but actually one very important reason is because they are Europe. I mean, there is nothing else you can be in this particular location where we live and where all these countries are. And I would say it had something to do with the standard of living, of course, but even more so, it had something to do with political standards, with actually having functioning institutions. Financially, it's still hard in most countries, but people live way better than they did, let's say, 30 years ago or 25 years ago. But politically, I'm not so sure, because politically the expectations were that institutions would be functioning, stable, neutral in terms of political affiliations. Courts would work as courts, not as appointees of political strongmen or political leadership, and you would find a job based on your qualifications, not on your family relations or friendships. In other words, that is something that I think attracted people the most. So in that sense, European Union played a very important role. In the meantime, of course, it weakened for many reasons, and I think we could discuss this for a long time, why European Union lost its transformative power and attraction in the region. In my opinion, by the way, if European Union is to play any role in the future, it has to, this is its problem, this is its task. This is part of European Union, or of European territory, and it's surrounded by the countries of the European Union. And in my opinion, it's not even enlargement, it's consolidation of European territory. And if European Union is not capable of consolidating its own territory and controlling it, then it's going to be very difficult to deal with China, Russia, United States, or any of the big powers. So in that sense, I think this should be very important for Europe. And in a way, we should look at Europe not as another big power here. We should look at Europe as us. I would say that the biggest challenge was was political exploitation of former conflicts and of ethnic diversity, and trying to use that to enhance the us and them, and through that get cheap votes, so to speak, or get votes for people that are not even sure that they agree with you, but you create an atmosphere in which they somehow feel scared of the other, and therefore they're going to vote for whoever presented herself or himself as belonging to your group, whatever that group might be. And that is present all over the region. This is conventionally known as nationalism or chauvinism, but actually, I think the better description or label for that syndrome, because it's a whole syndrome, is actually supremacy. This supremacy syndrome, where one group tries to sell the notion that somehow we are better than another group, and because of that we have the right to decide how they're going to live, the rules, and somehow are superior to them. This supremacy syndrome tries to discriminate not only against ethnic groups, but against women, LGBT, people from different regions, people of different age groups, depending on which one they belong to. But you will always recognize it. You will always, from one of these elements, you can always recognize the entire syndrome. And that has been a huge challenge, because it's somehow in the last, let's say, 10 years, spread worldwide. So it wasn't just, us here or people in the Western Balkans having their problems. It was something that somehow was, accepted in the old democracies, that was promoted by supposedly, the president of the oldest democracy and most stable democracy on the planet. So in a way, these guys got some support for their approach, and all of a sudden it wasn't just a mistake, it became simply one possible approach or one possible way of thinking about things, which is very detrimental. The other very important thing in the region, and detrimental thing, challenge in the region, is Bosnia-Herzegovina based on the Dayton Agreement. This, as we all know, and many times have repeated, Dayton Agreement was a way of stopping the war, but it then was left to be the model of state building, and it's impossible to build a functioning state with functioning institutions. So you have, in the middle of the region, you have constantly a country and its politicians who are playing this game of Republika Srpska is going to secede and join Serbia. No, it isn't. Part of it is going to secede and join Croatia. No, it isn't. Who is influencing? Everybody's playing their games on this territory of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Strategies. I think the most effective strategies were parts of civil society. These are not strategies. These are actors that actually worked in the direction of changing the political culture and reconciliation. Not all parts of civil society were extremely detrimental, because you have, of course, as you know, civil society that is way to the right populist side of the political spectrum. But parts of civil society, individual politicians, being actually a very small pool that the Western Balkans is, individual politicians can have very considerable influence, both negative and positive. Culture, I would say culture, literature, theater, movies, dance, people just, go out and work together, and because they don't recognize this being closed in their own small backyards. Business to some extent, but that's very interesting. Business actually has worked quite well across borders, but it wasn't very effective in reconciliation. Businessmen from one country bought big companies in another, went back and forth, but somehow this has gone, as far as changing the political culture is concerned, it has gone under the radar. There is a lot of cooperation. I'm not so sure about states as such, but companies, private businesses, companies, investment. You have companies in Croatia that were bought by Serbian business people, companies in Serbia bought by Croatian business people, in Slovenia, Bosnia Herzegovina, North Macedonia, all over the place. You have companies whose owners are from a neighboring or once removed former Yugoslav country. But that was a big deal at the very beginning. Let's say, in the late 90s, that was a big deal, especially between Serbia and Croatia. But after that, it somehow continued, but didn't really, I would say, affect much the political culture and the way societies react to each other and see each other. This is a very interesting thing, because it could have been, I assume it could have been used for those purposes, but somehow it wasn't, and business people were always very quiet when there was any kind of conflict or sort of political issue. They tried to stay away from that. First of all, of course, there are people who live in the countries of the Western Balkans today who actually actively promote and communicate across the borders, have joint projects. And luckily, there is a considerable number of people who are in favor of normality, let's say. As far as the diaspora is concerned, there are at least two, if not three layers of diaspora. There is diaspora from way back then, beginning of the 19th century, of the 20th century, end of 19th century. And now you have third, fourth generation of these people. They're mostly sentimental and neutral. Then you have the diaspora from the end of the Second World War, or this diaspora is extremely detrimental, because a lot of people who are active from that diaspora, who are politically active, are actually extreme right-wing, or people who, or sort of descendants of people who supported Nazis and Nazi and fascist occupation of Yugoslavia, and were part of those Quisling formations, Četnici or Ustaše primarily, but also in Slovenia, Belogardeci, they were all over the place. Those are detrimental. Those are not in any way helping, because they actually have different positions. And then you have the diaspora of people who left during or after the wars of the 90s. These are the most valuable, I would say, and these people could do the most. However, a lot of them left in disgust, I have to say. A lot of them left because they were angry by the local politicians in their respective countries. by the fact that because of dysfunctional states, institutions, corruption, opportunist politics, they lost their, or felt they were losing their chances. And they, unfortunately, mostly left with their families, meaning left not to come back. Since a lot of them were young, either well educated or prepared to invest in their education, a lot of them also integrated quite successfully into the societies where they emigrated to. And therefore, there is a smaller chance of them coming back. So this generation of people who left 30 years ago or 25 years ago, during or after the wars of former Yugoslavia, they're actually valuable group, a sort of treasure trove of the Balkans, so to speak. And if we as countries were capable, or countries of the Western Balkans were capable in the foreseeable future, in the near future, if possible, create conditions under which these people would choose to come back. And those conditions really have to do with politics first and economy second. Of course, economy is important. But if you look, for instance, there was a research done on the people who left Croatia in Ireland and somewhere else. And roughly 70% of the people said that they left because they couldn't take this continuation of wars through other means, what their kids were learning at school, politics that kept going back and rekindling old conflicts, dysfunctional institutions, and only about 30% said that they left because of economic reasons. So that in itself is, I would say, a roadmap of how to bring them back. I mean, we need better states. We need better politics. And potentially we have this, as a region, we have this incredibly valuable big group, hundreds of thousands of people that could come back with good education, with experience of functioning institutions, of quality management that could improve the situation in the region in general. It varies. Readiness of leaders as leaders themselves vary across time and within different countries. So you can have, this is why actually it's so important to seize the moment, carpe diem. When you have somebody who is halfway normal and halfway good intentioned, you should actually do as much as you can at that moment, because leaders, there are different leaders. I know practically all of them personally. I knew all of them personally. And they're very different. And at different times, you had leaders that could do good things and did some good things. And then for various reasons, at different times, you have also leaders who are not so good and are more, let's say, opportunistic and trying to use, as we know, fear, antagonism, hatred is something that is very often used in politics, because it has this very strong motivating potential. And so you have leaders like that. There is no one thing or one profile, one type of leader that you have, but occasionally you actually do have some leaders who want to do something that's common sense and that's good for the population and for their country and the people of that country, rather than just for themselves and their party or their best friends around them. But there is also one thing that that's important, probably only for the Western Balkans, and that is the readiness and capacity of the European Union, also as far as the European future of these countries is concerned. And when this is down, this encourages the, let's say, bad leaders or anti-European, anti-democratic leaders, more authoritarian leaders. When the European Union is more focused and in a way understands what it wants in the region and unified, that supports the more pro-democracy and let's say more enlightened leaders in the region. The European Union definitely has a very strong influence, especially had a very strong influence. I would say that in the last few years, it has sort of weakened in that sense, but also the interest and the attitude of the European Union towards Western Balkans has I was going to say changed, but actually there were some major mistakes. Let's say the story of North Macedonia is a major mistake. The European Union made not opening the negotiations after North Macedonia did a very brave thing and actually changed its name in order to end the conflict with Greece on its own. European Union is sort of presenting itself as if they helped a lot. No, they helped only in the sense that people believed that they were actually going to move ahead. And then they didn't. This was a major mistake, not only as a message to North Macedonia, but as a message to the entire region. Montenegro was ready to advance much faster. It wasn't advanced, it was held back. Now it had a government, God help us, we'll see what happens, but it has a new government that we are not quite sure in which direction it is going and what's going to happen there. Also, in the meantime, there are other players who have appeared and are much more active in the region. One old player with a lot of knowledge about the region is Russia. Russia, who I don't think has any specific focused interest, but who knows that maintaining chaos and uncertainty in the Western Balkans is a very good chip for it to play in its relations to, especially to the European Union, because it's a destabilizing element for the entire European Union, but also globally. So I don't think it sort of is looking at any specific outcome. It's more looking at no outcome whatsoever, and therefore deterioration. There is China, who I don't think has very specific, first of all, it's a new player here. It doesn't have very specific political interests apart from being in the countries that potentially will become EU member states. So through that influencing also its relation to the EU, but has very, sort of transportation, let's say, interest and economic interest because of the location of the region primarily. There is Turkey, that's a regional player. And has limited influence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I would say, and to some extent in Kosovo, and Albania. But in a way, Turkey at the moment has a lot of its own problems at home, so it hasn't been that aggressive. And then there is the United States, who left the region in the Trump era, apart from some very disruptive activity by the envoy Grenell. But other than that, it really wasn't very interested in the region. It seems that the Biden administration now is more interested and certainly has people who know much more about the region. But, you know, that is, and I think that because of the way the European Union played its cards, it is important that the US also plays a role in the region. It's very important to emphasize, compared to today, they were not so great, but they were way better. I agree. Why? We are all small, and a few individuals in key positions can actually make a difference. I would say that even for big countries, that's sometimes the case. Look at the American administration, for instance. But in small countries in particular, if through some weird combination of circumstances, some people who are positive in the sense of both cooperation, reconciliation, democratic standards, all of these things, not the sort of stupid, lying, selfish type of politics that is considered sometimes to be the rational kind, but let's say more rational on a broader scale, that in the end will produce some positive results for a greater number of people. If people like that get into a few key positions, that they can actually make a difference. And this was such a time. In some countries, you had the same people, but just by somehow getting together, I would say 3, 4, 5 at the most, people from different countries, you could actually create a better atmosphere. The problem is that it's very difficult. As I said at the beginning, once you stop actively working on these things, you have backsliding. It's the famous bicycle metaphor. You know, when you stop pedaling, you fall down, regardless of how far you have gotten. And this is why it's important to always have people who are pedaling in the good direction. Of course, the past impacts the present, because most facts on the ground are exactly the same. We are a multi-ethnic, multi-religious region that at different times in history tried to solve its key problem, which is the curse of small numbers, through different strategies. It was big empires, Austrian and Ottoman empires, and being part of that, and trying to, in these multi-ethnic empires, trying to maintain our languages, culture, history, identity, etc. It was Yugoslavia in 2 attempts, before the Second World War and after the Second World War. And it's the European Union at the moment, how to deal with the fact that you have relatively small groups of people or nations here that want to maintain and have some kind of recognizable identity, but are surrounded by bigger and stronger and more numerous nations, political nations and cultures. And how do you deal with that? How you go about being who you are without having to either disappear or having to fight somebody all the time. So I would say that these key things are still here. Our history is not just that. Our history is also very important leaders, both political, intellectual, cultural leaders who tried to deal with this issue in a positive way, in a cooperative way, in a way in which people could actually advance and live better. Today we have both kinds. We have both kinds of leaders. Unfortunately, it's short term. It's always easier for the populists, as we see. We also have some very successful populists in the neighborhood, like Hungary, for instance, and in Eastern Europe in general, that is en vogue, as they say at the moment. So, this is something that definitely influences the countries here. And we need a new generation of leaders. I hope this is gradually appearing and capable of building on the shoulders of some of us from the previous generation. And this, I would say, is probably the most important role that even when you're in a minority, politically speaking, that you can play. And this is that when the new leaders come up, they have somebody to sort of invoke, to call on, or to refer to as their heritage, so to speak, as their political heritage. One important thing to remember is that there are no ancient hatreds in this region. This is an absolute fabrication and simplification. It's almost to the contrary. It's just political exploitation of the diversity that these societies have. And political exploitation is always easier through conflict than through cooperation. But actually, in spite of this political exploitation that has been going on for centuries, it's not just this last period. In a way, cooperation in the end always won. So I would say let's stick with that.